polite conversation, courteous discussion. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And look around at what takes place on news channels daily in America. Arguments, hot debates, cut downs of people. Look at social media for more of the same examples. Where has courtesy gone in America? There used to be a time in this country where Republicans and Democrats, though they disagreed, they could have conversations and actually come to agreements where problems would be solved, not in line with their own selfish ambitions, but in line with the Constitution. Where have those times gone? That's the topic of today's discussion. So, before I get into that, and before I bring my guest on, I want to give a quick mention that Bold and Blunt is now available at edify.app/podcast, which is the place to go for faith-based podcasts. And of course, it's always available at washingtontimes.com. You can subscribe there, as a matter of fact, along with my 3 times a week newsletter, which contains all my commentaries that I write at the Washington Times, get them delivered right to your email box. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, my commentaries, my twice weekly podcasts, or you can also find Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. So where is all this great First Amendment freedom that we have in America right now? We've got the woke culture, the woke youth, the woke millennials, the crybaby millennials, the woke colleges, the First Amendment zones, free speech zones on college campuses, which is crazy when you just think about it. I thought free speech was a national thing, not a zoned allowance. And it's all come about because people can't just have discussions, can't have discussions where they disagree without breaking down into some sort of shouting match that attacks the person, not just the argument. Don't get me wrong, I don't have an issue with arguments. Some people are actually more argumentative than others. Some people like to sit back and listen and then form in their own minds their own arguments and so forth, so they can present them in a calmer tone. Some people don't have that personality and they end up just spouting whatever comes in their minds. But it shouldn't matter. In the end, we as Americans should be Americans first, right? All fighting for the same thing. All fighting for, number one, God-given individual rights. Whether you call it even God-given rights versus civil rights versus human rights shouldn't really be an item for hot discussion, because it's all focused on the idea that rights are individual. They're not part of the collective. They're not up for government grab. In this country, which was founded on religious freedom, by and large, and which was founded on the principle, if you read the Declaration of Independence, which I recommend everybody doing at least once in their lifetime, really more like annually. July 4th is a great day to do that. But anyhow, in the Declaration of Independence, as it says, our rights come from the Creator, which is not government. Government doesn't create, right? Government just takes the creation of others and exploits it, taxes it, uses it for government purposes. It's God who creates. God's the creator. So our rights in America come from God, not government. And that should be the base premise for all we fight for in America, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, even the nutty socialists and the crazy communists and the murderous Marxists. We should all, in America, agree that the unchanging, the everlasting should be rights come from the Creator. But without that premise, what happens is the doors get opened, the doors get flung wide open for discussions and debates and arguments about who gets what rights and who's allowed to have what rights and who must give up certain rights so that others can have those same rights. And government becomes the so-called equalizer of rights. They become the possessor of rights to give and dole out and, by logical extension, take as they see fit. So rights that should be automatic, suddenly, when you take away the premise that rights come from God, not government, suddenly become up for debate, up for grabs. And that's really where all the arguments in this country come from. You've got Republicans saying, for the most part, that this is the nation of individualism and that rights come from God and that government is only there to protect and uphold those individual rights. You have Democrats that give lip service to that idea, but by action turn around and pretend as if they in the political ruling class are the ones who have the power to give and dole and take certain rights as they see fit. That's where all these entitlement programs come from. That's where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's loudmouth rants come from, that she doesn't think something's fair, that government needs to take from Peter to give to Paul. And of course, by doing that, you always have the support of the Pauls of the nation, right? If you're a member of the political ruling class and you're taking from Peter to give to Paul, Paul loves you. So my point here is that most of the hot debates we have, most of the arguments, most of the straying from the Constitution and the foundations of America's God-given rights, most of the debate and discussion and argument over that comes from the fact that we can't even today in this society, in this modern day, agree on the idea of God-given rights. But if we still could, then I think debates between differing political people, differing political ideologies, between those with differing political opinions, could be a lot more courteous, could be a lot more sane. Right now, I look at the Democrat Party and I see nutcases. I just see a party filled with people who outright hate America, would love to crumble the Constitution, and would love to have the likes of Klaus Schwab, who is the founder of the World Economic Forum, who's akin to Anthony Fauci in terms of desires to be the tyrant, who would love to have him or someone like him rule over us peons in the middle class, us peons in the capitalistic class, us peons who believe in things like the Second Amendment and the right to self-defend, or who believe in the idea of parental rights more than state, government, teachers' unions' rights, who believe in the idea of free speech, of free exchange of ideas. That's where we're at in America right now, and sad to say, I don't see it getting any better. The responsibility comes from a variety of sources. The media certainly gains when people, when watchers, when viewers are angry and upset at each other. That makes for great TV moments, right? I mean, which would you rather watch? A fight on TV? A verbal sparring? Where there's a communication breakdown so great that it ends in name-calling? Or a civil, moderately toned, courteous discussion filled with pleases and thank yous, right? Unless you're part of the very minority class, and I don't mean that by skin color, I just mean that by demeanor, then you would much prefer to see the fight, right? Everybody likes a good train wreck. That's why traffic jams from accidents on the highway aren't so much from the accidents themselves as from the rubberneckers who slow down just to gaze, just to stare, just to look at somebody and try and catch a little piece of a broken bone sticking out of a body or a pile of blood on the pavement. That's pretty gruesome, but true, right? So where is America when it comes to courteous debate? And how come Republicans and Democrats can't have a civil discussion anymore? Part of it, I gotta say, is because the Democrats are so loony. But that doesn't mean, if you disagree with the loony Democrats, that you have to get just as lunatic as they are, right? You still have control over your own emotions, still have control over the words that actually come from your lips. Bad behavior doesn't excuse bad behavior, right? And my guest today is a perfect example of having a discussion between two people who have very different views about politics, but can still go forward and be courteous. His name is Dave Spencer. He runs a campaign called Practically Political, and it's all about being pragmatic in today's politics. I like that idea. I like the idea of practical, pragmatic solutions to today's turmoils. And he has an interesting background. He was born in New York, a member of the Rockefeller family. He grew up in that culture, in that background. He had a car accident early in life that ultimately lost him a leg and the use of an arm. So he's had some physical struggles, to put it mildly, to overcome. And yet he still maintains a positive, optimist outlook. And despite a political belief that differs very much from mine, and probably very much from a lot of you listening to Bold and Blunt right now, he still has an open door policy on discussing things that, get this, are pro-America and that will help America. And honestly, this is how it should be done in politics. Dave Spencer, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me.
The state of politics in America, let's talk about, when you look out at the political landscape, what do you see right now?
Well, it's pretty bleak, to be honest, because as a pragmatist, I'm the kind of person that says, what can we do? Even if there are differences, there's a job that's supposed to be done for the American people. There's basic functions that are supposed to be done. Budgets are supposed to be submitted. Resolutions are supposed to be passed. There's kind of a basic level of work, and I think, the tribalism has gotten so bad. And I guess what was, if I had to pick something over the last 2 years, which is really perfectly encapsulated, it's been COVID. This is the kind of thing in the past that would bring us together, right? Common cause, common enemy, something we all need to rally against. It's an equal opportunity effector or destroyer, whatever you want to say. And yet it's become so politicized. It's almost like a badge of honor for people on the right to resist COVID and be anti-vaxxers. And a lot of people on the left have gone so overboard about this mask stuff. And, to me, what's indicative about that is you look at the reasons that these blue states are giving for releasing mask mandates. They list out all this stuff. None of it is new. We knew all this 3 months ago, right? But the tide has turned against them, so they have to justify it. What really, when you think about the only piece of legislation that got passed in the Trump administration was that unnecessary tax cut. I think it's the worst piece of legislation ever. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but there wasn't anything else that was really passed. And, Biden was able to get infrastructure done. But again, people are receiving death threats for voting for infrastructure. Who doesn't like infrastructure? It's like handing out candy, right? But again, if you give a vote that helps the other side, even if it helps your constituents, you're evil. So those are two indications of how bad things have gotten. And I don't know, we're now looking at having two failed presidents in a row, which we can't afford. I think we forget, if we had somebody like a Bill Clinton or even a Reagan, obviously, Reagan or Clinton, but even someone like Obama or even George W. Bush. I never thought I'd wax nostalgic for George W. Bush. They could go out there and sell, and try to rally the American people. But Biden doesn't have the strength to do that, and Trump didn't have the skills or the discipline. So
personally, I think I am way more conservative than you are, and I have different viewpoints on Donald Trump, which is fine because I love engaging with people who have different viewpoints. I hate the speaking to the choir. And what I like about what you've done, though, is you've taken these viewpoints and you've turned them into sort of some action. And you've created this website and this campaign called Practically Political. And it's a way of engaging voices of all types, yes?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is, it's the first thing you have to do is you have to be able to talk to people on the other side. You have to have a modicum of trust. If you don't have a partner in whom you trust, you can't get anything done. And that's true in business. That's true in life. And so for me, I love engaging because it's never personal. I always go after the argument. I never go after the person. And that's what keeps you sane. And so much of this has now gotten, not only are you wrong, but your ideas are dangerous for the country. You're evil. And that's, first of all, it causes a lot of stress and takes years off your life. It's a terrible way to live. But secondly, it doesn't really, it doesn't achieve anything other than maybe a little personal satisfaction and,
Exactly.
Schadenfreude or whatever you want to do. So, and the thing is that if we actually took a step back, there are a lot of things that both parties fundamentally agree on. And there's a lot of things where you could, tax reform is a classic example. You could get rid of loopholes and you could lower rates. Democrats want to get rid of loopholes and Republicans want to lower rates. You could put together a panel and say, look, you have to vote up or down on this panel and it has to be revenue neutral. Those are the only two criteria, and you could get a lot done. On things like immigration reform, you could have tougher border security for, letting the dreamers stay. There's so many things you could do that actually there's 80% agreement on, but it's almost like it's a badge of honor to be an obstructionist, and it's a badge of honor to attack people and not try to get anything done. And that's the main, I think, one of the main problems. So we're just saying, let's just take a step back and try to talk about the issues and try to not make it personal, at least for a little while.
I'm glad you gave a couple of actual examples of where you think common ground between the two main political parties can be found in tax reform and immigration. But I have to say, I see the Democrat Party nowadays, and I'm on board with your motivations behind reaching out and reaching across party lines. But I see the Democrat Party days so far left, even from Bill Clinton days, that it is almost like dealing with socialists / Marxists more than American citizens. How am I wrong on that?
Well, I think the difference between the parties, and this is what I say, is that, you can have a debate about which party has gone more extreme. I think they both have gone pretty extreme. But the Democrats, for all their fecklessness and, just the level of incompetence is what drives me crazy. The infighting, it's like herding cats, whatever you think about it. They just haven't been able to govern, and they really have never needed to. One party is actually threatening democracy, and one party is doing things that I think really go against what have made this country so incredible. And if you look at democracy being under threat around the world, that really worries me. And more and more stuff comes out about Trump. And look, and I grew up in New York City, right? So when you grow up in New York City, you can't hate Donald Trump. If it's possible to have negative respect for someone.
Right. I see what you mean.
He would fit in that category, but it was like, yeah, he's a two-bit grifter, but he's our grifter. You know what I mean? He was entertaining. But having said that, I give credit to the good things he did, like Operation Warp Speed, getting more people invested in the process. To me, I think one of the reasons our political system is so dysfunctional is because we've become so complacent. So I don't care whether it's rage or love, but just get involved. Be passionate. He's gotten a lot more people involved. I think he redid the paradigm in the Middle East. I think that was a very good achievement. I think in a lot of places his heart was in the right place, but the execution was so horrific, whether it was North Korea, whether it was China, whether it was corporate tax reform, whether it was regulations. You just need to tell corporations, let's not have any new regulations. You don't have to gut the existing ones just to sell out to the fossil fuel industry. So, the list goes on and on. But I think it's important to give credit where it's due. I run into some liberals They cannot give Trump credit for one single thing. Just like, I think Biden hasn't done a lot of things well, but I think he's actually done a pretty good job of standing up to Putin compared to Obama, certainly. But some of my conservative friends, they just can't give him any credit, not even credit for that.
Do you have concerns about Joe Biden's cognitive abilities?
It's more his fortitude. I don't think he's necessarily senile. I just think he's old, and I think he's feeble. And that press conference that he held for an hour, if he'd been senile, I don't think he would have made it through that. And he doesn't have the strength to even speak normally sometimes. This whispering stuff doesn't help his cause. But I think, yes, I think he's too old for the job. And I think it's going to be very hard for him to run for a second term. And I think that puts the Democrats in a real pickle because, to put it mildly, the bench is pretty weak. I think Kamala is a really bad politician who hasn't really done anything. And I think that Democrats are trying to figure out a way to not have to make her the heir apparent, because if they do, they're in real trouble.
Yeah, and they're dragging out Hillary Clinton from the closet. That's the whispers now.
That's not going to happen. I think I'll give you. I always love to have a dark horse candidate. You want to hear my dark horse candidate?
Sure.
Governor Andy Beshear from Kentucky.
Oh, no kidding.
Because he's in a very red state. He's done a good job down the middle with COVID. And that's what's so sad is you look at these. The amazing thing about Trump is he's so far, though I think things are closing in. So far, he's been able to avoid getting snagged. But you look at the trail of wreckage. I mean, a guy like Ron DeSantis, who I really supported, Trump is just ruining that guy. I mean, he's gone off the deep end with COVID, and now this conspiracy. He wouldn't even acknowledge that Donald Trump was wrong about the election the way Mike Pence did. And so a lot of these guys, they just get sucked in and they get chewed out. I mean, look at the good people that are just don't have a career now and that don't have a reputation because they were chewed up and spat out. So you have it on both sides. But I think Andy Beshear is someone who's the kind of Democrat who could be elected. And by the way, we need governors. Okay, governors run governments. They make better presidents. People in Congress don't make good presidents. I mean, you could argue JFK, but I mean, JFK was, if you look at the accomplishments of his administration, they weren't that great, and most of that was done because of LBJ more than because of JFK himself, though he was very charismatic. But look at, Obama was really hamstrung by his lack of administrative experience. I think Biden is, running a business is not like running a government. George W. Bush was the first MBA. That didn't work out so well. Trump claims he's a businessman, but the only business success he's had is selling the myth of his success, which is actually no small achievement. But he's failed in everything he's done.
Well, look, on Trump, I got to say, I'm 180 degrees opposite from you on Trump. And here's why
Please, tell me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Here's why I loved Trump and why I continue to love Trump and why I welcome him running for another term. Trump, with his very simple America First, put that message into practice. And what he did was he tore up the elitism that was taking place on Capitol Hill, the friendly collaborations between Republicans and Democrats that got so friendly, it was very difficult to tell where conservatism started and liberalism finished. Basically, Republicans...
What's an example of that, would you say?
Well, immigration, for one. You had immigration talk on Capitol Hill for years and years, and you had Republicans joining forces with Democrats and basically getting nothing done. That whole law and order message got lost. Obamacare was something that wasn't fought hard enough against, in my viewpoint. The deficit, Republicans have jumped aboard rising the deficit, which is huge. It's enslaving our next generations. And what I liked about Trump is he busted that open and he spoke a more common man type of messaging, and it activated more like a Tea Party type politic in America than even in past years when the Tea Party was very active.
Well, I would say that talk was cheap. And by the way, I would say Donald Trump is not even a Republican or a conservative. I say he's best defined as a right-wing illiberal populist. And populism requires going against a lot of, I think, very important pillars of what's been really traditional Republican beliefs, like free trade, like deficit reduction. No one blew out the deficit more than Trump. And then, all these, one of the reasons, whether or not you think he's an authoritarian or not, if you look at why dictators love him, it's three main reasons. Because he's too disorganized to get stuff done that the U.S. needs to make the investments to dominate the 21st century the way we did the 20th. He's very transactionally based. Remember, he said the concentration camps in China for the Uyghurs were a good idea. I mean, just the stuff that's cringeworthy, right, for any person, not to mention the president. And also, he went against our alliances. He weakened our alliances. And that's one of the things that you've seen, which is what nothing Putin wants more is than the dissolution of NATO. And that's one of the things I think that caught Putin off guard this time, is that Biden has rallied NATO together. Even the Germans are now on board. And I think that is what we have going for us that China and Russia will never have, is our alliances. So, yeah, the talk was cheap. But when you look, and again, he ran as a populist, but he governed like a plutocrat. That 81% of that tax cut went to the top 1%. He talks about the common man, and he uses and needs the common man. But, no one's economic policies have been more inimical towards working class people than Donald Trump. But what Donald Trump and Steve Bannon were brilliant enough to figure out, and which the Democrats, some of my liberal friends, still can't understand, is for most people that doesn't matter, right? Because they vote on culture, race, and religion. They don't vote on pocketbook issues anymore. And, my uncle served in politics in West Virginia for 40 years. I lived in Arkansas for a while. So unlike a lot of people who grew up in my, patrician background, I really spent a lot of time in parts of the country, and I totally get the hillbilly elegy crowd, and I totally understand why they voted for Trump. Democrats discarded them. Voters don't mind being used, but they sure as hell mind being discarded, and Democrats were sucked in by the elites on the coast, and they forgot about their bread and butter demographic, which had been blue-collar whites.
Okay, now, see, to me, you hit the nail on the head with that Democrats have gone far too elitist, and they have forgotten their bread and butter. Yes. They have forgotten the working class.
Took advantage of that. It was, Bannon figured it out, but Trump got into it, and it was very, I give credit where it's due. It was one of the master political moves, certainly of our lifetime.
Let's talk briefly, because we've already gone beyond the 15 minutes, but I really wanted to get this in about your you have a fascinating background, and not only are you a member of the Rockefeller family, yes? I forget the affiliate. Yes. Okay. Nelson Rockefeller is your
great uncle.
Okay, so that's your background, that's your upbringing, but you also had a tragedy very early in life, at the age of 19, where you had a car accident which led to amputation of your arm and leg. Is that correct?
Well, I've had like two series. When I was 19, I lost my right leg above the knee, and then I had a nerve injury in my arm, so I had limited use of my right arm. And then I had 35 years of unblemished health, and then a few years ago I ended up tearing the quad tendon in my good leg, and then that resulted in a whole comedy of errors, and so I went through infections and surgeries, and so now my right leg is more limited. I have to walk with a brace. I can get around, but certainly less adroitly than I was before, so it's kind of been the two stages of physical challenges. So to put it mildly, I've been dealt more than my share of crappy physical hands.
And your voice sounds remarkably optimistic, I have to say. And is there a faith-based reason for that? Talk about how you would overcome a tragedy.
I am not a religious person, though I think faith is very important, and that's why I always draw the line between faith and religion. Faith is your set of beliefs, and that's the most important thing you have, and that's the one thing no one can ever take away from you, whereas religion is the proselytizing and the Catholic Church and the cramming of parochial laws down the throat of our secular society and all that stuff I really don't like. But so I'm more spiritual, and I think I'm able to. There's so many good things going on. I take a look at 2021. It was probably the most challenging year, other than my original accident, physically, that I had, and I think a lot of people would say woe is me and harp on that. But then I've had so many other good things happen in terms of my business and personal life and things like that I can focus on being bitter about being the physical crap, or I can focus on being grateful for the other stuff. And I find that gratitude makes one much happier than bitterness.
I wish more Americans would seize onto that message, because if anybody on this earth has reason to be grateful, it's American citizens. And that's something that could draw us all together, yes?
Yeah, it's been one of these funny things, just to be tangential for a second, because I love traveling. It's my greatest passion, but I went to Mexico just recently. I hadn't been out of the country for more than 2 years, when I used to go out almost every few weeks. But I've been going on these RV trips around the country, because it's a great, safe way to see things, and I got to say, spending a lot of time on the coast, I get so sick of people trashing this country. You go around to all places, typically I would probably go to more Trump states than blue states, because that's more of the heartland, but that's not the issue. But this is a great country, and you go around and you see all these wonderful communities and how diverse they are, and all the amazing things people are doing, and how proud they are of so much of what they're doing, and how they're surviving and they're fighting. And I just think most people don't realize, and you go to a place like China, or even a place like Russia, and just realize what a piece of crap place it is, and how awful the life is there. Or some of these communist countries like Cuba, where they're rationing eggs. And you realize, yes, we have challenges here. Yes, we've got major income inequality, which to me is what breeds populism. And whatever you think of Trump, you have to remember, he's the symptom. He's not the problem. And in some ways we're lucky that it was Trump, because if the next person who's a populist and wants to do what Trump wanted to do is going to be a lot more organized, a lot more capable, and could do a lot more damage. We were actually pretty lucky until the election. And that's where he's really damaged the country, in undermining faith in the most important thing we have, which is the peaceful transfer of power. As Mitch McConnell said, if the loser doesn't respect the outcome of an election, our democracy goes into a death spiral, and that's never happened before. And that's the one thing that he did, and I truly despise him for that.
And Mitch McConnell is
irreparable damage it's done irreparable damage to the country. You seem like a pretty reasonable person. You don't think the election was stolen, do you? You think Biden won it fair and square, don't you? I know there were some issues, but there wasn't enough issues to overturn the election.
I got to say, I have big question marks about the election, simply because we're not allowed to get those questions answered. My big issue with the election was that there were so many question marks that the courts just immediately threw out. And maybe most of them, rightly so, were thrown out of the courts. But Pennsylvania seemed a shut and dry case, and that was something that just couldn't even get heard in the courts. And this is where I think that Democrats and even Republicans go wrong, by not allowing the questions to be asked and vetted. When you have when you have social media, when you have people out there who can't even have a conversation like you and I, which I can tell we're opposite on quite a bit, but you're being polite to me, I'm being polite to you. But that doesn't go on in much of America. And if you can't ask questions, Americans get the red flags raised in their heads.
No, I agree, and I think that's there's the ability, and you have these entirely two different ecosystems. If people can't agree on the same facts, I don't see how you can effectively govern. And so until you have a really strong, in my opinion, president, or some dynamic that comes along that gets Americans at least starting to believe in the same facts, maybe when finally people get over the big lie, maybe when someone really, if I were president, I would go to every red state on a listening tour. Because the beautiful thing about Americans is they don't want you to agree with them. And I found this out when I was traveling through the country. All they want is to be heard, is to feel that you're listening.
Right.
And that's not that hard to do.
Right.
But yet it seems like so above the heads of so many politicians, because they're not really talking to their constituents, they're talking to their ecosystem, right? They're telling, people watch Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow because they want to be agreed with. They don't want their views challenged. They want them confirmed, right? That's the problem, is that if people really try to say, okay, let's just have a dialogue here, I think you could actually do it. But the way our ecosystems are set up, it doesn't behoove you to do that, or it rarely does.
Yeah, speaking to the choir is basically all that's allowed nowadays. And if you step outside those bounds, then you're torn apart. And which is why I'm very grateful for you coming on Bold and Blunt. Dave Spencer, founder of Practically Political, practicallypolitical.com. Check it out. And I really want to thank you for your time and for your discussion.
Thanks, Cheryl. Well, I will hope we can continue our conversations at some point. I really enjoyed it.
It would be great. Thank you. Well, there you have it, a different kind of Bold and Blunt show today, but that's great. That's what we do here at Bold and Blunt. If you like Bold and Blunt and want to subscribe, go to edify.app/podcast. Check out all the faith-based podcasts they have there for your listening pleasure, including Bold and Blunt. Or you can subscribe at WashingtonTimes.com. Go to WashingtonTimes.com, scroll to the bottom of the page where the newsletter section is. Click on it, click on my name, and sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter. It comes out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday right to your email box. And in it, you will get not only my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcast, but also all the commentaries that I write all day long at the Washington Times. Hope you subscribe, and if you already do, thank you so much. And I want to quickly mention that my next book is out for pre-order right now on Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, pretty much anywhere you can get fine books. It's called Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. You're going to want to learn about all the behind-scenes political goings-on of the last couple years where the left used the pandemic to exploit fear for personal ambition. Guaranteed there's going to be something in lockdown that you didn't know was taking place behind scenes for all these pandemic-justified losses of liberties. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.